Ford Explorer 5. Often, a potential buyer of the 5th-generation Ford Explorer is scared off by the engine line, but it's not the frequency and high cost of breakdowns that scare, but rather the lack of alternative units. The 3.5-liter units of the Cyclone series produce 249 and 294 horsepower each. The EcoBoost turbo gun assembled on the same cylinder block produces from 340 to 360 forces. You know, taxes, expenses, and all that. There are no other motors. And here the question arises by itself, why are people ready to feed this Highlander, and no less respectable American, the Toad Strangles? Moreover, just the same Explorer turned out to be one of the most economical large crossovers in terms of fuel appetite, an average of 13 to 14 liters per 100 kilometers. What other alternative is needed? It's just a fairy tale. What is more important, Ford Explorer will not offend with the engine resource. Driving 400,000 kilometers is not a problem for him, but the most real reality. As Toyota drivers say, after 100,000 kilometers, the run-in is past. Sorry, not everything is so clear. To extend the resource, you will have to not only change consumables in time and abandon deliberate violence with the gas pedal. Something needs to be done and done in advance, before it explodes somewhere. For example, remove the hell out of catalysts. There are 2 of them. Not all of them live up to 150 TKM. Someone was lucky enough to encounter shedding of honeycombs and up to the first weave on the odometer. The worst thing can happen if you pull until errors appear on the drop in catalyst efficiency. Crumbs after destruction can get into the combustion chamber and lift up the cylinders. Capital in this case is provided. We delete. For those who are concerned about nature, there is a solution to install metal catalysts. They are expensive. The second weak point of the engine was the pump. It also rarely reaches 150,000. It flows and leaves a puddle under the bottom. In this case, it is better to load the car onto a tow truck and repair, as there is a risk of catching a wedge of the pump, and after all, it rotates from the timing chain. They didn't listen to bang and stick pistons with valves. By the way, the chain itself holds up to 200 to 250 TKM with dignity. In many ways, the reliability of Ford Explorer 5 engines will depend on the fuel used. Although it is written that it is possible to fill in the 90-second, however, in practice, direct injection and catalysts like a good 95th without unnecessary impurities. If, under the hood, there is an inflated EcoBoost, then it is better to multiply the fuel recommendation by 2. A little about EcoBoost. As we said, it's technically the same 3.5 Cyclone, only with 2 turbines, thanks to which the Explorer turns from a pensioner's closet into a flying monster. The monster loves to eat and loves to be looked after. You can also safely cut the oil change period in half. You won't lose. Sooner or later, more precisely at about 200,000 kilometers, the Garrett snails will require replacement. Somewhere towards the first 100 it becomes clear from the oily pipes that the turbines begin to increase the amount of oil passed through the seals. All other problems and children's sores of the motor are similar to the atmospheric counterpart. The 6-speed automatic for the 5th-generation Explorer was developed jointly with General Motors. For Ford, this is not a compliment, given the disastrous 6T series of 6T transmissions in my opinion. However, the 6F55 automatic transmission of our hero, although similar to the 6T70, has only positive reviews from owners and servicemen. The margin of safety is sufficient so as not to worry about the box for at least 300 TKM, subject to periodic lubrication changes. The main problem of the Ford Explorer and the headache of its owners lies further in the bevel gear, called the transfer case, or even more simply transfer case. Not so long ago, they scolded the same node of the 3rd-generation Hyundai Santa Fe crossover, and here we are mothering again, but already an American. The Explorer's Rozdavka is located unsuccessfully near the catalysts. Also, due to its compactness, the node experiences considerable loads and, in addition to everything, heats itself up. All this led to the fact that the oil, obviously not designed for such thermal conditions, degrades after 25 to 30,000 kilometers, turns into something similar to grease. If the lubricant is not changed at this moment, then a complete octung sets in, accelerated destruction of bearings and gears. By 80,000 kilometers, who had earlier, there is a characteristic hum with vibration. This means that everything has arrived. Everyone is at risk. Urban vehicles are in particular danger, since natural cooling in this mode is the least. For a used car buyer, it's always a pig in a poke. On the lift, this is not diagnosed. For a complete check, the car will have to be accelerated along the highway up to 120 kilometers per hour and listen to possible howls. If the check showed that everything is fine, then it is still better to change the oil immediately, even if the car is brand new. We add chronic leakage of oil seals to this cauldron of design miscalculations and come to the conclusion that the Razdatka is rightfully considered the most dangerous place in the Explorer. Weak CV joint anthers after this seem like a trifle, but you should not neglect their periodic checks. It is better to replace the rubber band in time than to buy the entire hinge later. I can't help but pay tribute to the all-wheel drive system. The rear axle is connected here by the Dana electromagnetic clutch. Just like the terrain management off-road capability system, it works smoothly and economically in relation to the car. Problems with these bonds almost never arise. And yet it is worth remembering that the 5th Explorer is not intended for off-road rides. The suspension also hints at failure on the road. Cast front levers at first may give a false impression of the power of the chassis, but this is McPherson. It is pointless to expect the reliability of the 200 Cruisac from him. At the same time, the undercarriage is not particularly active. The first costs are usually required at a mileage of about 100,000 kilometers, about as long as bushings and stabilizer struts, as well as front wheel bearings. Silent blocks of the front levers rarely pass 150,000. Shock absorbers are much more tenacious. Rear suspension with a surprise. The breakup levers here came under a revocable campaign due to their tendency to split apart. The most annoying thing is that some were lucky enough to find out what it is when, right on the highway at a speed of 130 km/h, the rear wheel simply collapses on its side. When buying a car, check with the dealer that the work has been carried out or immediately sign up for a visit. At the same time, check the condition of the rear silent blocks, because they did not differ in endurance. 200,000 km is the limit of the resource. And what kind of Ford without problems with the rail on low runs? The owners are aware of the sore, so they drive and wait. They are waiting for the first knocks to appear or start biting the steering wheel in extreme positions and simply refuse the Euro. It will not be boring. The reason is again in the design. Water seeps into the rail through the anthers of the steering rods, and the lubricant, on the contrary, comes out, which is why the insides actively corrode. The Euro sometimes destroys the unscrewed bolt of the steering shaft pulley. Really fun? The owners of the Ford Explorer 5 have to deal with prevention here too. The most harmless thing is just knocking on bumps. They arise as usual due to worn railguide bushings. Everything, as with the third Focus. After 30 to 40 TKM you can already expect the first sounds. The body of the Ford Explorer is also a typical American. Over time, it becomes overgrown with pockets of corrosion. First of all, rust begins to devour the rear doors and the area of U200B U200B wheel arches, then the saffron mushrooms sprout in front of the thresholds under the plastic lining. For each copy older than 4 years, of those that have visited us for verification, the indicated places demanded attention. So let this be a reason not for abandoning the car, but for an objective bargain. For owners of fat configurations with a sunroof, it is worth taking care of the preventive cleaning of roof drains. Otherwise, water dripping from the ceiling after heavy rains, in addition to the awkward situation with wet pants, can add financial problems due to a burned-out sunroof drive board. Drainages are located at the back. One has only to lift the trunk lid. In short, be proactive. And don't race. I know Explorer with EcoBoost will provoke, but do not give in. There is a risk of losing the outer lining of the A-pillars. It is plastic. For many it was simply blown away by a gust of wind. As for the finish, everything is very good here. The materials are not budget. Of the complaints, perhaps the cracking sidewalls of the front seat cushions and the weak buttons of the center console. The steering wheel at 100,000 kilometers looks a little glossy, but not chipped. More questions about the reliability of auxiliary equipment, including electrics. A frequent problem for owners was the glitches of the standard SYNC multimedia system. Pearls are different. The refusal of voice control, the touch screen does not work, just the lack of response to commands. Usually all this is treated by flashing, but some had to completely change the head unit. Due to the failure of the stove damper drive motor, the climate system begins to live its own life, to cool where it was not asked and heat what is not needed. It is solved simply by replacing the specified part. And again, corrosion, more precisely oxidation. The most harmless thing that happens for this reason is the rotting of the rear view camera wiring. It happens rarely, it is eliminated inexpensively. Much more expensive and, unfortunately, more often you have to change the air conditioning pipes leading to the evaporator of the rear row of seats. There is a braid on this section of the line, which supposedly should protect the tubes, but in fact turned out to be a real dirt collector, which, in fact, provokes decayed processes. Like I said, be proactive. In this case, it is more useful to simply get rid of the braid. If you change the oil and the bevel gear every 25 to 30 TKM, if you check the anthers on the rails, if you throw out the catalysts in advance, then the Ford Explorer can and will be a very hearty assistant for you in family affairs. A considerable resource is laid in the main units. You just need to help the car take full advantage of it, eliminating the listed errors of hurried manufacturers. A big plus of the 5th generation Explorer is that it is often taken by respectable, decent people with family priorities, who primarily evaluate not dynamic abilities, but a large 7-seater saloon with a normal third row. Almost like with Volvo. From this, there are few seriously broken cars on sale. Most often they come across simply neglected and unserviced as it should. Not everyone knows what the Explorer comes with, and not everyone is ready for the cost of spare parts. Despite all the decency of the main audience, twisted runs sometimes come across, especially if the car has been in the hands of outbids. You can check the real mileage with computer diagnostics by finding the desired parameter of the engine control unit. Multi-brand scanners are suitable for this, but it is better to enlist the support of dealer equipment. Another plus in favor of Explorer in the secondary market is the low initial price and the propensity of owners to bargain. Firstly, there is always a reason, and secondly, sellers realize that if they don't meet their needs now, then the next call from other potential buyers will not come soon. Therefore, there is no desire to dissuade you from the Ford Explorer, although there is a reason. Normal car at a reasonable price. The main thing is to immediately eliminate weaknesses and shortcomings, or prepare your wallet for drastic measures in the future. The choice is yours. But I'll say on my own, to enjoy the comfort, sitting on pins and needles, SOSO pleasure.